Hey brothers and sisters, welcome to our last episode of Joshua. That's right, it snuck up on me this one. I thought we had a lot more episodes to go, but this is the end of Joshua, our last two chapters today. And we're also going to talk about the sowing and the reaping. What behavior we sow and what behavior we're going to reap. And a lot of it's written in Joshua here, and it relates so much to our life today. So without further ado, let's go into it. Reaping what you sow. There's some amazing gems in today's episode, guys. So, Joshua 23 to 24. As the book of Joshua winds down, we are given Joshua's farewell speech here. Some think he made this at Shiloh, the new spot for the tabernacle. However, it was more likely at Timnath-Serah, Joshua's home. For he was now very old, approaching 110 years. So travel would have been terribly difficult. And he probably followed the pattern of Moses, who gave his farewell speech in the mountains of Moab. Giving an address on the mountains of a hill was symbolic of the words carrying much divine power and authority. However, unlike Moses and Yahusha's great mountain speeches, that were full of revolutionary understandings and renewed wondrous concepts, Joshua's was not. Joshua's speech was a reminder for Israel to follow the ways of Yahusha as already handed down by Moses. Joshua really had nothing to add to what Moses said and didn't claim that he did. He only meant to encourage Israel into doing what Yahusha, through Moses, instructed them all to do. You see, on Mount Sinai, many of Yahusha's instructions were almost theoretical, in that much of them could not be fully behaved properly until inside the promised land. So while true and right, they were more of a concept, not an actual nitty-gritty, real everyday experience, at that point anyway. However, after 40 years, Moses got up before his death and summarized all the instructions, not only to remind a new generation of them, but so that the living words could be relevant to the promised land that they were about to inherit. Because as we've seen, once Joshua took them over the Jordan, the battle was on. Once Joshua took them over the Jordan, the battle was on. And the instructions were no longer merely something to speak of or merely hold as true. They had to be lived and breathed in everyday life. And if obedience wasn't behaved, then death and destruction ensued. So now Joshua hopes to impart this experience onto the next generation again before he leaves them. Isn't that what's happening today? The living words are going, if you just look at your own personal experience, the living words which were just once read on a page and you came to believe in them, however you came to believe in them, you believed in them. And then the name, or however you came in the door was approached. You came through the doorway of deliverance, Yahuwah, the name, you got immersed, all that. The living words became more than just something you believe, something that convicted, something that burned, something that changed. It became something now in our life as the living bride. It becomes something that has to be behaved, experienced every single day. And that's why we're not only just the scriptures we're rewording, we're trying to take all the concepts of scripture, put them into small packages, behavioral things that you can do to overcome. That's what the behavior revolution is here for, to cut the corners, to help, to tell you all that Yahusha's telling us about how to be his bride. Because it's bloody hard in these last days. There's pressure coming at us from everywhere, brothers and sisters. But look back here. Moses handed it over to Joshua, and Joshua doesn't know who it's going to get handed over to, but he knows he's about to die. So he's summarizing his life and he's saying what he wants to say. So with that in our minds now, let's go into the last two chapters. Yahusha let Israel live in peace with its neighbors for a long time, and Joshua was at the end of his life. So one day he called a meeting of the leaders of the tribes of Israel, including the elders, judges, and the officials, saying, I'm now very old, and you've all seen how Yahuwah your Elohim fought for you and helped you defeat the nations who lived in this land. There are still some nations left, but Yahuwah has promised you their land as an inheritance too. So when you attack them, He'll make them all run as He drives them out for you. Don't worry, I've already divided their land among all your tribes, as I did with the land of the nations I defeated between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. So don't be afraid, don't worry. Don't be afraid, don't worry. Even though there's some enemies still left in there, even though there's some uncleanness still in there, don't worry. I know what to do with it. You just flow with me. You just be obedient and we'll get rid of all that. So, be sure that you carefully obey everything written in the book of Moses. Everything written in the book of Moses. Obey it all. And don't be distracted to the left or to the right, but keep your eyes focused to guard and do exactly what it says. Don't be distracted. We've got to walk through the world. We've got to, do all these things, but we don't have to be distracted from Yahusha, because He goes before us and behind us. We keep Him with us all day, every day, traveling through the highways and byways of this life. So, keep focused to do what it says. Because the giving of the Torah, the divine instructions given to Moses, was so central to all that would happen in Yahusha's redemption plan, Joshua was emphasizing big time that just because Israel gained a new leader when Moses died and would gain another new leader at Joshua's death, nothing about Yahusha's ways or instructions had or would change. Nothing about Yahusha's ways or instructions had or would change. I mean, look how the 2.5 tribes felt in our last episode. Just because they were going back over the river to live on the other side. Are we still associated with Joshua? Should we still call ourselves Israelites? Is Yahuwah going to be with us? Is He still our Elohim? What's this? What's that? See how base their understanding was? And the understanding of the spiritual realm was almost non-existent. So, So Joshua pleads with the people of Israel to lay hold of what kind of a wonderful future awaits them. Lay hold of what kind of wonderful future awaits them. Yahusha will finish driving out the Canaanites from the promised land, but, and here is the key, but, Israel must be obedient to Yahusha, and this is secured by following His instructions. Don't have anything to do with the nations that live around you, and don't bow down or pray to their deities. Make oaths or promises in their names. In fact, don't even speak of their wicked names, but cling to Yahuwah and be as obedient to Him as you've been up until now. So Joshua warns the people against idolatry, because Yisrael's uniqueness among all the nations of the earth is dependent on their cleaving to Yahusha, their Elohim. While the nations serve many deities, Israel serves only one. And the way to idolatry, Joshua says, is through contact with the nations that are both still within the promised land and those nearby. The way to idolatry is to hang around all the people that are idolatrous. I'm not talking about where you have to work and you have to make money and you have to do this and go to the shops and go to the bank and go to the butcher and the baker and all that sort of thing. I'm not talking about that. Who you chill out, hang around, associate with, in your off time, you'll naturally share attributes with those people and it will become normal, won't it? So, and Joshua says it's through contact with the nations that are both still within the promised land and those nearby. The issue of succumbing to this horrendous wickedness is why Joshua says that Israel should not even mention the name of their deities, nor invoke the names in an oath. Don't even talk about them. Don't even talk about them. So don't invoke their names in an oath, let alone bow down and worship them. Don't get involved in all that stuff. We live in a 21st century world where the names and places, the language itself, the English language, is just a babbling hodgepodge of sounds, and that is scriptural prophecy. I will speak my truth in the last days on the lips, on the babbling lips, tongue babbling lips, however it says. So don't bow down and worship them either, yeah? And this is all behavior, guys, remember. You see, the thing that Israel still couldn't grasp was that Yahusha claimed to fulfill all the functions that other nations needed a multitude of deities for. He fulfilled all those functions that they needed lots of deities for. Every nation outside of Israel had idols who were deities based in nature and had various functions of the natural world like rain, fire, wind, storms, fertility. There was a sun god, moon god, ocean god, river god, etc. The universally accepted understanding of the world in that era was that one not only had to approach a deity who was in charge of a particular function in nature for your needs, but that every nation had their own and different set of deities to perform those functions. This wasn't just a church and state type thing where some people believed it and some didn't. This was the natural, everyday, from old to young. This was the mindset of all the nations, polytheistic. It wasn't just something that they talked about on weekends and then just went back and were normal people. No, this was part of their normal life. When they went out into the crops, they were conscious of the deity. When they were in the water or trying to fish for fish, they were conscious, praying to the deity. That everything in their life was controlled by this deity worship. So, can you see how that's a behavior? So, when you attacked powerful nations, Yahuwah made them run away, and no one has ever been able to stand up to you. Any one of you can defeat 1,000 enemy soldiers because Yahuwah your Elohim fights for you, just as he promised. So be sure to always love Yahuwah your Elohim. And here is the antidote to all the dangers that awaits Israel if they should go astray. What's the antidote? Love Yahusha. We talked about that in our last episode, coming into the love of Yahusha, being perfected in the love. The results of our deliverance and Yahusha writing a love for his living words on our circumcised hearts, the results of this is that we love to love him. And the results of our loving Yahusha is to be obedient to his words. Because to Yahusha, obedience is the love language and behavior he desires from his treasured bride. Obedience. So, don't ever turn your backs on Yahuwah your Elohim by marrying people from the nations that are left in the land. Don't even make friends with them. I tell you that if you are friendly with those people, Yahuwah won't chase them away when you attack. Instead, they'll be like a trap for your feet, a whip on your back, and thorns in your eyes. And finally, none of you will be left in this good land that Yahuwah has given you. That makes sense? If Yisrael begins to dabble in idolatry, tries to behave like the outside nations around her who don't have Yahusha as their Elohim, then Yahusha will no longer see them as the generation that his promises will come through, and his redemption plan for them will be taken back. His redemption plan for them will be taken back. Yahusha's inheritance can be removed. Did you know that? None of this once saved, always saved rubbish. Yahusha's inheritance can be removed. Let me tell you, Yahusha's inheritance can be removed. If you don't behave the right way, it can be all taken off you. Do you believe that? Yahusha ain't playing around. If you don't cough up with the goodies and behave and look after what he's given you, it's gone, mate. So, Yahusha's inheritance can be removed and given to another, more obedient generation. This is a principle that, as followers of Yahusha, we must always keep fearfully in the forefront of our minds and never get so comfortable in our relationship with him to think that he will never act to preserve his set of partners and his justice, even if it means the ultimate harm for us. He will. He will. He's not mocked and he ain't playing around. There's a reference to that in Romans here. Take a good look at Yahusha's kindness and his sharp severity. This same being that we worship is kind, but he also has a sharp severity. On the one hand, severity towards those who walked away, but on the other hand, kindness towards you. As long as you hang in there and operate in his kindness, you've got to operate in the kindness and hang in there. Otherwise, you'll be cut off too. So, same being two very different attributes, kind and severe, sharp and severe. He can be both. And we've felt both. Which do you want? So Joshua says, I'm about to die, as everyone must. But deep in your hearts, you know that Yahuwah has kept every promise he ever made to you. Not one of them has been broken. Yes, when Yahuwah makes a promise, he does it. And likewise, when he makes a threat, he follows through on that too, until you're all destroyed. Yahuwah is our Elohim. He gave us this wonderful land and made an eternal blood covenant of deliverance with us, that we would serve only him. But if you follow other deities, it will make Yahuwah furious and he'll start getting rid of you. And soon, not one of you will be left in this good land that he's given you. So, that was chapter 23. And you can see Joshua's heart. It's not the end of what Joshua was going to say, but that's what he said to the elders and the close people around him. So you can see he wants them to get this. He doesn't want there to be a decline, you know. He wants them to stay in this amazing blessing. He's been taught straight from Moses and he passed it all down to these people. So let's go into chapter 24, our last chapter of Joshua. And why are we going to this bit? Let's go down here for a second. Here. Joshua called the tribes of Israel together for a meeting at Shechem. So this is a more official meeting now. He called the tribes of Israel together for a meeting at Shechem. In his last speech, it was just a meeting of the leaders, the elders, judges and officials. So it was the people he was close to and the elders of the nation he would pass this on to. Now he wants to speak to Israel. And he's speaking to them at Shechem, which is interesting. Why Shechem and not Shiloh? Shechem, which is under the terebinth trees back with Abraham, Jacob's well, Joseph's tomb, Mount Gerizim, all these things happened in Shechem. Shechem was also where that bloodbath was. Why Shechem and not Shiloh for this final speech that Joshua is going to give? This is filled with gems, this guy, so let's get into it. As we come into chapter 24, Joshua now gathers Israel together for a purpose that is a little different than the farewell address of 23, the one we just did. This meeting is about making a blood covenant renewal with Israel. Same covenant, same instructions, same Elohim, new leadership coming. This whole chapter is happening at Shechem. Remember good old Shechem? This place had tremendous supernatural and historical significance for Israel. And I found this amazing, coming full circle from even beginning of Genesis right through. I thought it was going to be mainly over in Deuteronomy, but Joshua, it's actually coming to more of a fruition now in Joshua because they're settled in the land and it's come full circle. So it makes sense to take them back to where it all started, which was Shechem. This place had tremendous supernatural and historical significance for Israel. It was there that Yahusha first promised Abraham that this would be the land that he would eventually be inheriting, that would be inherited by his descendants, as many as the stars in the sky and sand on the seashore, making this the beginning of the whole physical process of deliverance. This place was the beginning of the whole physical process of deliverance and redemption for mankind that would eventually produce our Messiah. Because Messiah came through these people. All part of the plan. a redemptive plan that's been ticking away, still ticking away now. Jacob had returned to Canaan after more than 2 decades in Mesopotamia, where he lived with his uncle Laban. In Mesopotamia, Jacob married both of Laban's daughters and acquired some servant wives, and so had developed a substantial family of his own. Upon leaving the area, Rachel nicked off with her father's idols and brought them with her to Canaan, but other family members would not have left without their idols either. As Jacob's family grew, he apparently tolerated their desire to hang on to their familiar deities. It was at Shechem that Jacob purchased some land from the king of Shechem and had hopes to settle down. But after a calamitous event when his daughter Dinah was raped by the king of Shechem's son, and then Levi and Simeon led their brothers on a barbaric raid of revenge upon the city of Shechem that resulted in every last adult male being slaughtered, Jacob realized that drastic change was necessary. Hence, all the idols and earrings were buried, and they were buried right here. We can understand the need to bury the idols, but why did Jacob's family have to give up their earrings as well? Because it was usual for jewellery to be fashioned using symbols of the various deities' qualities. Did they worship their earrings? No, but nonetheless they represented something from their past that needed to be left behind, and it was definitely not pleasing to Yahusha, so they had to go. Nothing to do with earrings today, guys. You can wear earrings, nothing to do with that. We're talking about behaviour. This was about things in their life that were holding them back, things from their past. People, places, things, jewellery even, that were holding them back. They had to go. So there, at the same spot that Jacob buried the false idols of his past in order to move on to the new life in Yahusha, this same place, Joshua ordered all Israel to put away or bury whatever false deities that remained among them, so they would follow only the Elohim of Israel. Notice the description of the deities that were to be put away. It was the idols of your ancestors. We're about to come into this. It was the idols of your ancestors from beyond the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. Yisrael was still dallying in the same pantheon of idolatry that Jacob permitted his household to transport from Mesopotamia so many centuries earlier. They're still in it. And don't just look at it as idolatry as in idols. Think of it as in spirits. Every idol has someone captivated. It's not the eye, it's not the wood, it's not the stone, it's not the head, it's not the Buddha, it's not the actual statue, it's the spirit. There's a spirit whispering, a spirit convincing you that this is real, that this, and what do spirits convince us of today? What do spirits convince us that we're allowed to do, we're allowed to say, that we're allowed to believe, we're allowed to look at, we're allowed to partake, we're allowed to eat, we're allowed to dress? What do the spirits convince us, or try to convince us of today? This is the idea of idolatry, because there's a spirit behind every idol. It's obviously the same spirit. Look, they're still dallying in the same pantheon of idols that Jacob admitted about 800, 700 years before. So, after the Exodus, when Israel first crossed the Jordan River, they gathered at Shechem in the area that lay between the 2 mountains of Ebal and Gerizim, and it was there that the blessings and curses of the divine instructions were pronounced and monuments built to memorialize Israel's triumphant entry into the promised land. This was a big deal. They had finally reached the land, but now they're settling in it. But on the other hand, it was Shiloh that was the current place of rest for the wilderness tabernacle and served as the seat of government for Joshua. The priesthood was centered at Shiloh, the Ark of the Blood Covenant Witness was there, and therefore the portal of Yahusha was at Shiloh too. What would have been a better place of covenant renewal before Yahusha than at his sanctuary in Shiloh? So why wasn't it at Shiloh? Why didn't this renewal ceremony happen at Shiloh where the tabernacle was? Because anytime Yahusha says, "Come before me," he's talking about the entrance to the tabernacle. And they came before Yahuwah. Where? It's like a code. was always at the tabernacle. So why wasn't this done at the tabernacle? Because by meeting at Shechem instead of at Shiloh, it was made clear that a blood covenant between Yisrael and Yahusha was more than just a religious matter for the priests to administrate and the common folk to have little part in. This wasn't just something that the religious folk, the priesthood were involved in. No. It was inseparable from the secular life of the community. The blood covenant raised up through Moses was not to be practiced only during the Moedim, appointed times, scriptural feasts, Shabbats, new moons, ritual purifications and sacrifices, all under the supervision of the Levites. No, it was to be the basis for the everyday life of all Yahusha's people. How does that relate to us today? Where have we come from? Where have we come from? Coming from Sunday worship, where we only do it on Sundays, even coming into the 𝗏𝕗𝕗 movement, having Yahusha's name, where we only really get serious at the feasts, all that sort of stuff. What's Yahusha talking about now? What is true worship? It's the behavior. Can you clock off? Is there a clock off time where you can just go and do what you want? Stuff your Yahusha? No. You're in it 24/7. And if you're not, you feel it. That's the training process. This blood covenant deliverance was to be the basis for the everyday life of all Yahusha's people. And that's why he didn't do it at the tabernacle. He did it at Shechem, because everybody, even the most common folk, knew that their father in the Hebrew, as a Hebrew, was Abraham. And where did Yahusha meet with Abraham? At Shechem. So, this is a big deal, guys. Cast your mind back. Pretend you're there. This is a huge deal. So, a prophetic era was coming to a close. What had begun at Shechem around 700 years earlier at a simple stone altar next to a terebinth tree at a site that held no city and likely not even a village yet, came full circle. Abraham's promise of land had been held by Yahusha, and with Joshua as the leader, Yisrael was now firmly entrenched in that very promised land. Territories had been allotted to the 12 tribes, the enemy had been subdued, destroyed or driven out, a semi-permanent location for the tabernacle had been established, and Yahusha's people were at rest. In fact, this was a time like no other in Israel's history. Their obedience and dedication to Yahusha was at its peak, and so were their blessings. Sadly, this state of affairs would be very short-lived. So, this is a bit of an introduction to the last chapter we're about to go into. That's why it was at Shechem, and that's why Shechem meant so much to the Israelites. Because even before their bondage and slavery in Egypt, they came from Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham was met by Yahusha under the terebinth trees of Mamre and the altar that was built at Shechem. Having been through that with such intensity the last 2 years of my life, from Genesis to here, it's just so encouraging to see. This is the same Elohim, living word of Yahusha that speaks to us today, that we have open door, portal access to. So Joshua called the tribes of Israel together for a meeting at Shechem and had the leaders, including the elders, judges, and the officials, come up and present themselves to Yahusha. Then Joshua told everyone to listen to this message from Yahusha, the Elohim of Israel. Yahusha said, "Long ago your ancestors lived beyond the Euphrates River and they worshipped other deities." Beyond the Euphrates River, that's where Abraham came from. And they worshipped other deities. This continued until the time your ancestor Terah and his 2 sons Abraham and Nahor. But I brought Abraham across the Euphrates River and led him through the land of Canaan, blessing him by giving him Isaac, the first in the line of many descendants. Then I gave Isaac 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And I had Esau live in the hill country of Mount Seir, but your ancestor Jacob and his children went to live in Egypt. Now let's talk about why Yahusha, through Joshua is going there. Bit of a history lesson. Why are we going there? Come out from among her. Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were more associated with Mesopotamia beyond the Euphrates than they were with the lands to the south, Canaan. Mesopotamia was the motherlode of the Mystery Babylon Mazzaroth system that was the basis of the Canaanite worship system. In fact, they were basically the same. When we recount the story of Abraham coming into the land of Canaan and stopping at Shechem to both build a simple altar, obviously upon which to sacrifice, and to hear Yahusha's promise to him, we remember that Yahusha was intent that Abraham had to leave the land of his own ancestors, Mesopotamia, to go to a new place that Yahusha would show him. Part of the reason this was necessary was that Abraham was raised up in the pantheon of Babylonian Baal, Asherah, sun worship. His own father, Terach, carved and sold images of these deities, presumably as his means of making a living. So Abraham was a pagan, raised up out of the nations and crossed over. That's what the word Hebrew means in Hebrew. Crossed, one who crosses over. So he was raised a pagan and crossed over into a new understanding and behaviour of deliverance through meeting Yahusha, the only living Elohim. So the first step Yahusha took to de-paganize Abraham was to remove him from his land. Sound familiar, guys? What have you been removed from? The longer you've been in this movement, the more things you will have been removed from. But this is the way Yahusha de-paganizes us. Come out from among them all. Get him away from the idolatry that was embedded there. Now this same system was also in Canaan, where he went, but Abraham knew very little about that and didn't entirely know what to expect. Here's what Abraham and every other human alive in the Middle East knew about deities. They were territorial, and there were a lot of them. This was not something one questioned. It was common knowledge that certain deities occupied and ruled over specific territories and nations. This is not a thing that Yahusha could ever have simply explained to Abraham to immediately make him understand. So he didn't. That's why we don't read about much of that idolatrous stuff in Genesis. The maturity, the mindset of mankind at this point couldn't have even wrapped their mind around that. It just wouldn't have computed for Abraham. It's not just about believing something, it's about comprehending it as well. Abraham believed Yahusha. We know he did because he obeyed. He believed Yahusha and it was counted for him as obedience and purity before Yahusha. But he comprehended Yahusha in the context of his life and of the world as it currently existed. What does that mean? The concept of one Elohim would have been beyond crazy, even to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. One Elohim for the whole world? Get out of here. So even though Abraham believed and followed and obeyed, he believed in Yahusha within the context of just the general mindset of the era, which was this. Why? This revelation of just who Yahusha is had to be progressively revealed. Just like today, many still can't believe that the Father and Son are one. Yahusha is Yahuwah, Yahuwah is Yahusha. They can't believe that today. Many arguments still going on about that. How come he's talking to himself then? All that stuff they say. Because he can do anything. It is essentially a notion that Yahusha is taking mankind on a journey and that it has a very definite path with explicit milestones along the way, at which point new information is given. There is no skipping of milestones and there is no fast forwarding. Mankind had to go through a progression of gaining knowledge in a certain way, in a certain order, at a certain speed, so that they could comprehend what it is that Yahusha was doing and just who he is. We can see that in our own lives. He reveals bit by bit to us who he really is. We're not in the darkness of how it was back here. We've got all the hindsight of all the scriptural prophecies, but Progressive revelation doesn't reflect Yahusha's nature. It's merely because the delicate fabric of mankind's nature requires it. So he doesn't progressively reveal things because he's playing games or because he needs to. No, he's doing it so that he can slowly absorb into our minds because we're so stuffed in the head. So it's because of mankind's delicate fabric of our nature. It would take centuries of baby steps for Abraham and then his descendants to get to a point where the concept of there being only one Elohim in all existence, who was not at all part of the universally known and accepted pantheon of gods system that men had created, could be understood. It would take centuries. Yeah. And so for this reason, we've seen Yahusha use what is already in existence for his own purposes. He'll use existing customs, traditions, born by existing cultures and societies, and give them a new meaning. He did exactly that when he introduced himself to all the patriarchs as 𝗷𝗚𝗙𝕚𝕚, the mighty Elohim of the mountain. He allowed these earliest generations of Hebrews to go ahead and retain a sort of mental picture of him in the same light as the well understood deities of the Canaanites. He was the Elohim of the mountain. They had all these other deities. So he introduced himself as, I believe, many don't believe. Most commentaries believe that back here he only revealed himself as El Shaddai. I don't believe that. I believe right from Adam they knew his name because it's who he is. But I believe they forgot his name. So anyway, he just became the Elohim of the mountain. Yahuwah, the Elohim of the mountain. We've got an Elohim for this and an Elohim for that. He's the Elohim of the mountain. El Shaddai means that. In fact, the whole sacrificial system, remember, even once they got into the land and got given the instructions, the whole sacrificial system in Leviticus leans on the visual concept of Yahusha being up in the sky somewhere to receive the smoke from the offerings. Yahusha allowed this and met mankind where they were in order to educate them in who he is. So with this polytheistic understanding of Israel, we see that when they left Egypt, they really had no problem with the experience of encountering a new Elohim at Mount Sinai, which wasn't in Canaan or in Egypt. After all, they were in an entirely different territory than they had been before. So when Yahusha reminded them of his name, it was, to the Hebrews' way of thinking, that this was the name of the Elohim who was the supreme ruler over the territory they had journeyed to when they left Egypt. The only real problem they had was grasping that this Elohim of Mount Sinai was the same as the one who had worked such powerful miracles in Egypt. Because they're territorial, remember? I mean, that broke all the known rules concerning how deities operated. And so we find Yahusha saying over and over again in his instructions, I am Yahuwah, the Elohim who led you out of Egypt. Duh, I used to think that back then. Why does it keep saying this? We know who you are. This is why, because they didn't. They couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that this is the same Elohim that was back in Egypt. Because everywhere they went, there were different deities, apparently. He was emphasizing that even though it went against everything they thought they knew about deities, he in fact operated without territorial boundaries, limitations, or man-made restrictions. So back to Joshua at Shechem, the warning from Yahusha against Israel involving themselves in any way with these mysterious, the warning from Yahusha against Israel involving themselves in any way with these mystery Babylonian deities increased. These warnings increased. Where before such an association was tolerated to a good degree, and the threats, if they ignored his demands, also increased. So even though in the earlier books, they were permitted because of their mindset, now the warnings are increasing and so are the punishments, the demands increased. The new generation of Hebrew residents had not moved into Canaan, where the Canaanite deities ruled. They had not moved into a Canaan territory where Canaanite deities ruled. No way. They moved into a land ruled by Yahusha, and he despised the Canaanite idolatry. Progressive revelation of who he is. So now he's brought them to a point that he believes they're mature enough, and they are, Whether they choose to or not is another thing, but they are mature enough to understand that I am the only living Elohim. There's no others. And we see that right from Mount Sinai with the 10 words, everything. It's wrapped up in the first 3. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. You will have no other mighty ones in my face. Why do you think he worded it like that? You will have no other ones. Because they don't exist. Yeah? So, he opens many great speeches Moses did with all this thing about idolatry. There are no other in existence. I will not share. I am jealous. I will not. So, later, I sent Moses and his brother Aaron to help your people, and I made all those horrible things happen to the Egyptians. I brought your ancestors out of Egypt, but the Egyptians got in their chariots and on their horses and chased your ancestors, catching up with them at the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. Your people cried out to me for help, so I put a dark cloud between them and the Egyptians. Then I opened up the sea and let your people walk across on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, I made the sea swallow them, and they drowned while you watched. Interestingly, when Yisrael was in Egypt, most Hebrews didn't believe that Elohim was with them. That is one reason they lost hope. Deities were territorial, so how could he possibly be with them when he ruled over Canaan? Thus they had no Elohim to help them when they were in Egypt. Yet it was understood that, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. You're in Egypt, worship the Egyptian deities. They may not do a lot for you, but at the same time you don't want to arouse their anger against you. One of the reasons that Jacob hoped so fervently that he and his sons and their families could get back to Canaan was so they could get back to their Elohim, Yahuwah El Shaddai, mighty Elohim of the mountain, who presided over Canaan. In fact, only for the excitement to see his son Joseph alive again, Jacob would not have left at all, and was still very nervous to do so, which is why we saw Yahusha appear to him at Beersheba on the way to Egypt to encourage him. Remember that? He said, I am the Elohim of your father, remember? Don't stress or be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I have prepared a very special place for all of your family, and they will become a great nation. I myself am going down with you to Egypt, and I myself will bring you back out to this promised land again. You will die in Egypt, but your eyes will finally get to see your darling son again. So Yahusha encouraged Jacob to go into Egypt. Don't be afraid. I'll be with you there. I'm not territorial. I'm not like these other stupid deities that don't exist. I'm everywhere. I'll take you in, I'll bring you out. The name of your Elohim meant everything back here, and Yisrael had forgotten theirs. So with Moses at the burning bush, a new milestone along the journey had been reached. It was time for more information to be added because the people were ready for it, and it began by reminding them of his name, which started this whole revolutionary idea that Yahusha cannot be compared to any other pagan deity made by hands. Remember, he said to Moses, down here at the burning bush, because Moses said, well, what's your name? They're not going to believe me unless I tell them who you are. I'm not like any of those other deities. I'm above and beyond any imagination the people have of me. I'm not confined by who they think I am, and I won't be compared to their deities of wood and stone. Now go and tell them that Yahuwah has sent you. That's all you need to know. Yahuwah. Asher, Ahaya, Asher, something like that. Ahaya, Asher, Ahaya, something like that. I am who I am, in other words. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I was who I was. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I'm not compared to any of those. I just am. Who are you? I am. So, and then of course you've got a picture there of the altar. This is where it all started, in Shechem, by the altar. This was the first time we looked at the altars, remember, and associated them with our heart and our behaviour. This is the only place that a mild, I wouldn't even call it really a portal. It was more of a voice. Although Yahusha did appear and walk with Abraham and they had a meal together, remember? But still, let's move on. So, Yahusha continued, you live in the desert for a long time. When I brought you into the land east of the Jordan River, the Amorites were living there and they fought you. but with my help you defeated them, wiped them out and took their land. King Balak decided that his nation Moab would go to war against you, so he asked Balaam to come and put a curse on you. But I wouldn't listen to Balaam, and I rescued you by making him bless you instead of curse you. Unlike the pagan prophets who manipulated their deities on behalf of men, the true prophet simply takes orders from Yahusha and carries them out. Yahusha is unimpressed with the wants of prophets and cannot be boxed in. Yahusha does not listen and obey prophets. He directs their actions and words. Yahusha can even turn a curse from the enemy intended to harm his people into a blessing. Then you crossed the Jordan River and came to Jericho, where its rulers fought you, and so did the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And I helped you defeat them all. Your enemies ran from you, but not because you had swords and bows and arrows, but because I made your enemy panic and run away, as I'd done with the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River. You didn't have to work for this land. I gave it to you. Now you live in towns you didn't plant, and you eat grapes and olives from vineyards and trees you didn't plant. Then Joshua told the people, fear Yahuwah, obey him, and serve him in perfection and truth. Get rid of your idols that your ancestors served when they lived on the other side of the Euphrates River and in Egypt. Today is the day to make up your minds. This is why we talked about the idolatry from the Euphrates River and Babylonian, and it went into Egypt, because of what Joshua is saying here. Fear Yahuwah, obey him, serve him in perfection and truth. Get rid of the idols your ancestors served when they lived on the other side of the Euphrates River in Egypt. Today is the day to make up your mind. If you think it's evil or ridiculous to serve Yahuwah, then don't. But make up your mind and choose right now, today. Sowing obedience will reap life, and sowing disobedience will reap death. Today you must choose life or death. You want to go back and serve the same idols your ancestors did? Or maybe you'll worship the idols of the Amorites here, since you're now living in their land, apparently. Is that what you want? As far as I'm concerned, though, they can all get stuffed. I won't be giving them a second thought. As for me and my house, we will serve only Yahuwah. They can all get stuffed, mate. Then the people answered, we would never stop worshipping Yahuwah, for he is our Elohim. We were slaves in Egypt as our ancestors had been, but we saw Yahuwah work miracles to set our people free and to bring us out of Egypt. Even though other nations were all around us, Yahuwah protected us wherever we went. And when we fought the Amorites and the other nations that lived in this land, Yahuwah made them run away. Yes, we will serve Yahuwah because he's our Elohim. What is troubling is what they did not say. They did not say that they would turn away from foreign idols, did they? They did not agree to bury, so to speak, their idols and be rid of them. Rather, they only agreed not to abandon Yahusha. We would never stop worshipping Yahusha, as well as all the others. Yes, we will serve Yahuwah because he's our Elohim, as well as all the others. It's troubling what they did not say. They only agreed not to abandon Yahusha in favour of other deities. In their minds, this meant they could have other deities as long as they also continued to worship Yahusha as well. And here is the problem that Yisrael has faced for the entire term of existence. And here is the problem for which they have suffered at Yahusha's hand greatly. Now, into the 21st century, and rebranded and repackaged idolatry is still running rampant, and mankind, even half of Yahusha's bride, still thinks they can partake of both. Can we partake of both? No, we can't. And if we continue to, we won't be part of the wise virgins, the wise maidens. So, because he wants a perfect, spotless, sold over bride. So, Yisrael's just made this declaration. Joshua said, seriously? You guys don't serve Yahuwah? You don't even try to. He's a mighty, set-apart Elohim and extremely jealous. He sees everything you're doing and doesn't put up with your perverted wickedness. If you continue to ignore him and disobey his instructions by worshipping your sneaky little pathetic idols, he will completely drive you out of this promised land of inheritance and consume you all, even after orchestrating such wonders and goodness to deliver you and give you this land. So he's coming in hard now, isn't he? Isn't this supposed to be an uplifting re-establishing of the covenant? You know? No, because he knows what's really going on behind the scenes. He lives amongst them. He knows what they're doing. He knows how they're worshipping. But the people shouted, "No, we do serve Yahuwah. Seriously, we do. We obey him." Joshua said, "Okay, well, you're all standing here today as your own witness of what you yourselves are declaring with your own mouths, stating that you serve and obey Yahuwah. Isn't that true?" "Yes, it's true," they answered. That's just a poster there about, "As for me and my house, we will serve Yahuwah." So isn't that true? You're witnesses to your own behaviour here. You've declared it. You can all be your own witnesses that you've done it before Yahusha. "Is that true?" "Yes, it's true," they answered. "Well, that's all well and good," Joshua said, "but I know for a fact that many of you still have strange deities from the nations that you still bow down and serve. Seriously, get rid of your idols. You must decide once and for all that you want to incline your heart towards Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, and serve only him. Only him. All right? Yahuwah is our Elohim that we serve. Yahuwah is the Elohim that we serve, and we obey his voice, the people said. Not putting the word only in there though, are they? We obey his voice. So Joshua established a blood covenant renewal between Yahusha and Israel that day at Shechem, and once again raised up the divine instructions for them to live by, writing them down in the book of the instructions of Yahusha. Then he set up a large stone under the oak tree at the set-apart place of Yahusha in Shechem and told the people, "Look at this stone. It has heard everything that Yahuwah has said to us." So our Elohim can call this stone as a witness if we ever reject him. So you can see even back here, even what Joshua's saying. You don't talk to stones, you don't listen to stones. It's all very cosmic and spiritual, and you know. But this is the mindset Yahusha was working with at the time. He's got them to the point now where they understand, whether they're willing to be obedient or not is another thing, but he's got them to the point where they understand and they can wrap their minds around the fact that there is only one living Elohim. He's got them to that place now. So, then Joshua sent everyone back, "Hey, go home." Got that? Go home. So, that was fascinating, I found, about the polytheistic system. We've dealt with it before, but we're coming full circle now into the land that they're settling in. And if they wanted to be fruitious and blessed, they had to only serve and obey Yahusha. Today, he won't have us sold over to anything else, to other people. He's very jealous. He won't have us serving, coming under, worshipping, admiring, adoring other people, men and women, other movements, other objects, clothing, movements, TV shows, movies, concerts, anything that you could do out in the world that you could put above him. He won't have, no, So, you can move in and out of the world and you can watch a movie or a TV show, whatever, but I'm just saying, what you love, he won't have you adoring anything more than him. Will not. He's very jealous. So, then we have the death of Joshua. Not long afterwards, Yahusha's servant Joshua died at the age of 110 years old. And the Israelites buried him in his own land at Timnah-Serah, north of Mount Gash in the hill country of Ephraim. And as long as Joshua had lived, Israel served and obeyed Yahusha. As long as Joshua had lived, Israel served and obeyed Yahusha. There were other leaders old enough to remember everything that Yahusha had done for Israel. And for as long as these men lived also, Israel continued to listen to the voice of Yahusha their Elohim and obey him. So even the men that Joshua had trained up they continued. We find a very significant honour bestowed upon Joshua at his death that had not been given to him during his life. He was called a servant of Yahusha. This was a title that belongs supremely to Moses, and it is rare. It's a rare one. When Joshua was Moses' assistant, and when he finally took over the leadership role of Israel upon Moses' death, Joshua is given the title of the servant of Moses. But now at his death, the title servant of Yahusha has transferred to Joshua. The influence of Joshua upon Israel was enormous. His example of leadership is unmatched in all the ancient scriptures. In reality, the latter story of King Solomon is the story of an anti-Joshua, an example of the worst kind of leadership. Because Joshua poured his life out into his people and into preparing the next generation of leaders. Into what have we been talking about the last month or so? About letting the young people come through, the younger generations come through, getting out of the path, getting out of the doorway. Don't stand in the doorway. Train them up, encourage them to come through. First shall be last, last shall be first. Joshua poured his life out into his people and prepared them, preparing the next generation of leaders. The passage here makes it clear that immediately following his death, Israel was well governed by many of those Joshua had mentored. And as a result, Israel served Yahusha for a time in a manner that seemed to have pleased him. This is, I dare say, I haven't gone on in this depth further, in this much detail, but I dare say this is the climax, this is the height of Yisrael's existence. It all kind of goes downhill from here. Because Moses is gone, Joshua is gone. So, on a separate note, remember, so that was the death of Joshua. On a separate note, remember when the people of Israel left Egypt, they brought the bones of Joseph along with them? Well, they buried them in the field at Shechem that Jacob had bought for 100 pieces of silver from Hamor, the founder of Shechem. The town and the field both became part of the land belonging to the descendants of Joseph. This detail is added here not because Joseph was buried at the same time Joshua died, because it would have been one of the first things Israel did when they entered Canaan. Wouldn't it? You wouldn't be carrying around a dead corpse for the sake of it. No. As soon as they were anywhere near Shechem, they would have gone up and buried him. So it's not put in here because of the timeline. It's just added by the author at this point because it is. He's obviously wrapping up his thoughts and hadn't mentioned it earlier. So we're just adding a note there. Remember Joseph's bones? Well, they got buried here too. Finally, he says, and when Eleazar the priest died, he was buried in the hill country of Ephraim on a hill that belonged to his son Phinehas. After Joshua died, the current high priest Eleazar passed away too. And we don't know exactly how long after Joshua Eleazar died. And Phinehas was now the new high priest of Israel. It is appropriate for us to close the book on this golden era of conquest and obedience of Yahusha's people on this note. It's appropriate to close this era of golden conquest on this note because now we have both the military leader and the priestly leaders of the conquest era both in their graves. So the two most influential people at this time, in the time of Joshua, we had Joshua out there fighting the battles. He wasn't a mediator like Moses was. He was just their national leader. And of course, then you had Eleazar, the high priest, who was dealing with the tabernacle and everything. The two greatest leaders at the time were now dead, which kind of closes up the era, this golden era of conquest and obedience. The next historical era of Israel is, unfortunately, not so glorious as the one that just ended. It is called the era of the judges, or Shophatim, and there was no Joshua-like figure to guide Israel. The priesthood was supposed to function in that matter, to a degree, and each tribal leader was to emulate Joshua, but they did not. Rather, each did what was best in their own eyes, and Israel would pay a terrible price for it. So stay tuned. That is the end of Joshua. So What I want to talk about is sowing and reaping, because Joshua, as well as Moses on his deathbed, Joshua on his deathbed is basically, in a summary, saying, choose today who you will serve. Do you want death or you want life? You know, as you sow, so you'll reap. So that's the end of Joshua. As you sow, so shall you reap. Let's bring this into the 21st century. Yahusha said, take heed that no one leads you astray. For many shall come in my name, saying, I'm the Messiah. And they shall lead many astray. And you shall begin to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not troubled. All the old people, even young people, are troubled today. They're all troubled. Oh, I wouldn't want to bring kids into the world these days. They're all troubled by the world and what's going on, the current events. Don't be troubled, for these have to take place, but the end is not yet. For ethnicity shall rise against ethnicity. It's all happening, isn't it? The violence against colours, not only sexism, but racism and all that sort of stuff. The ethnicity against ethnicity, my personal beliefs against your personal beliefs, my colour against your colour, my race against your race, all this stuff. And rain against rain. Yeah? And there shall be scarcities of food and deadly diseases and earthquakes in places. Is this not all happening? And all these are the beginning of birth pains. And then many shall stumble, and they shall deliver up one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise up and lead many astray. Plenty of those on TV and not on TV. And because of the increase in lawlessness, the love of many shall become cold. How does people love become cold? Disobedience. Increase in lawlessness, an increase in Torahlessness, not obeying Yahusha's instructions. An increase in that results in your love going cold. But he who shall endure to the end shall be delivered. I thought we were delivered upon our immersion. Legally. But he who endures to the end will physically, actually be transformed, delivered. And this Besorah, this good news, this message of the reign shall be proclaimed in all the world as a witness to all nations. And then the end shall come. That's what we're doing here, isn't it? Through the means of the internet, proclaiming this to the whole world. That Yahusha is the only Elohim. That's the whole point of this, isn't it? All these mindsets you're into, all these Facebook pages, all these cults, all these movements, all these mindsets, things that you passionately love, all the, everything that people are into, that's great. But that's not where it's at. Yahusha is the only living Elohim. And in his name is the only source of deliverance. That is the message, isn't it? That was the message for the early assembly. The fact that he's alive. That guy you heard about in Jerusalem. They killed him. He died. He was resurrected. He's alive. And he can heal you. He can deliver you. That's the same message today. There's only one name where you find deliverance. Of course, most of the world don't want deliverance, and that's the key. We're searching the matrix. We're in the matrix, stalking the matrix, looking for people who want to be unplugged and pulled out. And they're the ones you work with. Yahusha knows who his bride is. He's already chosen them. When we see the abomination that lays waste in the hearts of men and women, there shall be great distress. What is the abomination of desolation? What is the abomination that lays waste? The abomination that sets itself up in the temple of Yahusha, assuming to be Yahusha, of Yahusha, thinking he's Yahusha. It's all the dragon. It's all Satan. But where is the dwelling place of Yahusha now? So when you see the abomination that lays waste set up in the dwelling place, set up in the set apart place, which is right here, when you see Satan controlling everybody, when you see the abomination in the hearts of men and women, there shall be great distress, such as had not been since the beginning of the world, until this time, no, nor ever shall be. Don't believe in false messiahs. False messiahs and prophets shall arise doing great signs and wonders. Great signs and wonders. Yahusha has forewarned us of all this. Great signs and wonders could be miracles, couldn't it? I'm not just talking about technological, delusions. I'm not just talking about rip-offs and holograms and things like that of messiahs coming from the sky. I'm talking about genuine signs and wonders. Genuine in that they're real, Because, Satan can do things like that too, Great signs and wonders. What about the soothsayers, the diviners in Egypt? Moses threw down a rod and it turned into a staff. Moses threw down a rod and it turned into a snake. Oh, big whoop, we can do the same thing. In fact, the first few miracles were just my God can do this, well, my God can do that, my God can do this, my God can do that. Well, until the point where Yahusha outshined all of it and showed up all the other deities. Yahusha has forewarned us of all this. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven. The stars shall fall from the 𝗓𝗪𝗡, from the sky, and the powers of the universe shall be shaken. Then Yahusha shall appear in the sky. The tribes of the earth shall mourn at the coming of Yahusha on the clouds with great power and esteem. And his messengers shall gather his chosen ones from the earth. Yahusha said, when you see the fig tree put forth branches and leaves, you know summer is near. Likewise, when you see these things happening, know that he is at the door. He's at the door. The 𝗓𝗪𝗡 and the earth. Both dimensions will pass away. Both dimensions will pass away, but my word shall remain. Because it's all going to be renewed. All the dimensions are going to be renewed and everything in them. As the days of Noah, so shall the coming of Yahusha be. As they were in the days before the flood, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and they didn't know till the flood came and took them all away. So it will be when Yahusha returns. Watch then for the signs, for no one knows when the Master shall return. Do you believe it's this close, guys? According to the signs, where do you think you stand in relation to his coming? Where do you think you stand in relation to his coming? Be honest with yourself. Where are you at? You mature yet? You thinking about others as greater than yourself? Or you're always focused on yourself? Are you a wise or unwise virgin? You still got your clutches, still got your pinky, your little toe, dabbing it in the waters of paganism, dabbing it into the world, into the perversities, the depravities, or the whatever, what have you of the world. You're still partaking of both camps. Unwise or wise? Do you see any of these signs in the world? Well, that's an obvious one, isn't it? They're all happening in the world. Have your fruits matured, ready for harvest? Have you overcome the old behavior of the world? Be honest with yourself, guys. This is not about anyone else that you have to prove yourself to. This is between you and Yahusha. You can fool everybody in your life if you want to, but you can't fool Yahusha. And anybody who's gone further down the path than you can't fool them really either, because this genuineness of behavior, this sincerity, this maturity, through doing the rules, it shows up the behavior. And you're either in it or you're not. You can't fake it. Are you in relationship with Yahusha through your portal? How close do you think it is? What is the relationship you have with Yahusha through the portal? What do you talk about? What do you talk to him about? What does he talk to you about? These are the things that if you're having a relationship with him, when you come among the brothers and sisters, the genuine ones, you've never got nothing to say, because they're eager, because they've got a portal too. They want to know what you said to Yahusha and what he said to you, and they want to share with you what he said to them and they've said to him. So, it's amazing. How close do you think it is? I think the clock is about to strike midnight. I think he's stood up and he's on his way. So that's long enough, guys. It's been a long one. That's the end of Joshua. Thank you for going on this journey with me. It's been phenomenal. Each book we take on and go through, I just find Yahusha moving big ways in my life and my family, bringing us further down the path, maturing us. He's doing so. When I look back at Genesis, I'm a completely different person to when I started Genesis. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you know, even when we started Joshua, the way I felt, the way I behaved about things. Yahusha's right in there with his bride, getting her in the head, you know, goading and flogging. He wants us to behave a certain way. So do it. Come into the peace, come into the rest. Love you guys.